There comes a moment in every soul's journey when the familiar ground beneath our feet begins to tremble, when the carefully constructed edifice of who we think we are starts to crack along invisible fault lines. This is not collapse. This is invitation, an invitation to descend. In the mythology of the Greeks, Persephone was gathering flowers in a sunlit meadow when the earth split open and Hades, lord of the underworld, emerged to claim her as his bride. One moment she was reaching for a bloom, innocent and unburdened. The next, she was spiraling downward into realms she never knew existed. This is how the psyche calls us home, not through gentle persuasion, but through the sudden opening of chasms we thought were solid ground. We are all Persephone. We are all standing in our own meadows of consciousness, picking the safe flowers of our acceptable selves when the earth of our certainty gives way. What emerges from that split is not a dark god seeking to possess us, but something far more intimate and terrifying, our own shadow, that unlived portion of ourselves that we have banished to the depths. The shadow, Jung's term for everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves, is not some demonic force lurking in the corners of our psyche. It is our twin, our double, the sibling we locked in the basement of consciousness because its presence made us uncomfortable. It carries within its darkness not only our fears and failures, but our unrealized potential, our creative fire, our authentic power. It is both wound and treasure, poison and medicine, destroyer and creator. But the shadow is cunning. It does not announce itself with fanfare or demand recognition through grand gestures. Instead, it operates through sabotage, the quiet, persistent undermining of our conscious intentions. It speaks through the procrastination that keeps us from pursuing our dreams, the perfectionism that paralyzes our creativity, the self-doubt that whispers we are not worthy of love. It orchestrates the small betrayals we commit against ourselves daily, the ways we turn away from our own light as if it might blind us. This is the twilight realm where we find ourselves, caught between the bright certainty of our conscious minds and the fertile darkness of what lies beneath. In this liminal space, neither fully awake nor completely asleep to our true nature, we begin to sense the presence of something vast and ancient, stirring in the depths. It is our own wholeness, calling to us through the very mechanisms of our self-destruction. The descent into the underworld is not a punishment, it is a pilgrimage. Every mythology recognizes this sacred journey. Inanna's descent to meet her dark sister Ereshkigal, Orpheus following Eurydice into the realm of the dead, Jesus spending 3 days in the tomb before resurrection. These are not stories of defeat, but of transformation, not tales of loss, but of finding what was never truly lost, only hidden. In our modern world, we have forgotten the sacred nature of descent. We interpret every setback as failure, every moment of darkness as depression, every encounter with our limitations as evidence of our inadequacy. We have lost the understanding that the psyche, like nature itself, moves in cycles, that after every winter comes spring, after every death comes rebirth, after every descent comes ascension, carrying the treasures of the deep. The shadow's sabotage is not random cruelty, but purposeful disruption. It breaks apart the false structures we have built around ourselves, the personas we wear like armor, the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what we deserve. It creates chaos, not to destroy us, but to clear space for something more authentic to emerge. Like a forest fire that clears away the undergrowth so new growth can reach the sunlight, the shadow's destructive work is ultimately creative. But first, we must be willing to descend. We must be willing to leave the sunlit meadows of our comfortable illusions and follow the cracks in our carefully constructed reality down into the fertile darkness where our disowned selves wait. This descent requires tremendous courage. for it means acknowledging that we are not who we pretend to be, that our conscious identity is only a small island floating on an ocean of unconscious possibility. The sacred wound that initiates this journey is different for each of us. For some, it is the repeated pattern of relationships that begin with promise and end in familiar pain. For others, it is the career that looks successful from the outside but feels hollow within, or the creative gift that remains perpetually unrealized, always one day away from expression. The wound might be an addiction, a phobia, a compulsion, or simply the quiet desperation of a life that feels like it is being lived by someone else. Whatever form it takes, this wound is not our enemy, but our teacher. It is the crack in our armor through which the light of deeper truth can enter. It is the place where our shadow has been trying to get our attention, using the only language it knows, the language of symptoms, of sabotage, of sacred disruption. Jung understood that every neurosis, every psychological symptom, every repeated pattern of self-defeat carries within it the seed of its own healing. The very mechanism that seems to be destroying us is actually trying to save us, not from external threats, but from the prison of our own limited self-concept. The shadow sabotages our false selves not out of malice, but out of love, out of a deep knowing that we are capable of so much more than we allow ourselves to believe. In this twilight between consciousness and the abyss, we stand at the threshold of the most important journey we will ever take, the journey home to ourselves. Not to the self we think we are, but to the self with a capital S that Jung described as the archetype of wholeness, the divine spark that contains all of our contradictions, all of our light and shadow, all of our human complexity held in perfect dynamic balance. This is where our story truly begins, not in the bright meadows of our illusions, but in the depths where our exiled selves have been waiting, not with the judgment we feared, but with the unconditional love we have been seeking our entire lives. The descent into the underworld is the first step in the dance of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who we truly are. The shadow is calling, the earth is opening, the invitation to descend has been extended. What matters now is not whether we are ready, we are never ready for transformation, but whether we are willing to trust that in the darkness below, something sacred waits to be born. Listen now to the whisper of the gleaming mask, that crystalline facade we have so carefully constructed before the mirror of the world's gaze. See how it catches light like polished marble, reflecting back only what we believe others wish to see, never what we truly are. This is the persona's most seductive deception, the first shadow that creeps into the sacred space of creation, the tyranny of perfection, that golden prison we mistake for a crown. Somewhere in the depths of your being, a saboteur stirs. It speaks in the voice of reason, yet its words drip with poison. Not yet, it whispers when your hand reaches for the pen. Not ready, it murmurs when your soul calls you toward the canvas. Not good enough, it hisses when the rough draft of your dream begins to take shape in the trembling light of dawn. This is the shadow wearing the mask of wisdom, the unconscious part of yourself that has learned to wield perfectionism like a sacred blade, not to carve beauty into being, but to slice away at the very throat of authentic creation. The perfectionist shadow is perhaps the most cunning of all our inner adversaries, for it does not present itself as destruction. No, it arrives dressed in the robes of ambition, speaking the language of excellence, carrying banners that read quality and mastery. It convinces us that we are noble warriors in pursuit of the sublime, when in truth we have become prisoners in a tower of our own making, paralyzed by the fear of producing anything that might reveal our essential humanity. This shadow knows the secret architecture of your shame. It has mapped every vulnerable corner where your authentic self dwells, waiting. It understands precisely which words will freeze your creative blood. What if they laugh? What if they see that you are not the genius you pretend to be? What if your work reveals you as ordinary, flawed, beautifully and terrifyingly human? The perfectionist shadow speaks these fears into existence like an incantation, and suddenly the blank page becomes a threatening void. The empty canvas transforms into an accusation. The silent instrument becomes a judge, waiting to pronounce your inadequacy. Jung understood this dance between the persona and the shadow, how they conspire to keep us trapped in the comfortable cage of non-action. The persona demands that we appear flawless to the outer world, while the shadow whispers that our authentic efforts will surely expose us as frauds. Caught between these two forces, we find ourselves in a kind of psychological purgatory, too terrified to create honestly, too proud to create imperfectly, and so we create nothing at all. But observe more closely this perfectionist shadow, and you will discover something profound. It is not actually concerned with perfection. True perfection, if such a thing could exist in the mortal realm, would require creation, would demand the courage to begin, to stumble, to revise, to grow. No, this shadow is concerned with something far more insidious, the preservation of the false self's illusion of potential greatness. As long as you never truly begin, you can continue to believe in your unlimited potential. As long as you never complete anything, you never have to face the vulnerable truth of your current capabilities. As long as you never share your authentic work with the world, you never have to risk the ego's death that comes with honest feedback, with failure, with the necessary humbling that all growth requires. The perfectionist shadow feeds on this delusion like a vampire feeds on blood. It gorges itself on your untested dreams, your unrealized visions, your carefully hoarded potential energy. It grows fat and powerful, while your actual creative life withers, like a plant that receives plenty of praise for its theoretical ability to bloom, but never feels the vulnerable necessity of pushing through soil toward sunlight. This is the enantiodromia of perfectionism, the way it transforms into its opposite. What begins as a genuine desire for excellence becomes the very force that prevents excellence from emerging. The higher we set our impossible standards, the more surely we guarantee our failure to meet them. The more desperately we cling to the image of ourselves as potentially perfect creators, the more certainly we avoid the messy, imperfect, gloriously human process of actual creation. Consider the myth of Icarus, that ancient story that speaks so directly to our perfectionist predicament. Icarus receives the gift of flight, the wondrous wings that could carry him toward freedom. But the shadow whispers in his ear, "Why be content with careful flight when you could touch the sun itself? Why accept the limitations of the mortal realm when you could claim godhood?" And so he flies not toward freedom, but toward a perfection that exists only in fantasy, and in reaching for this impossible goal, he loses everything. The perfectionist shadow is our inner Icarus, forever reaching for the sun of impossible standards, while the real work of creation waits patiently below. It convinces us that anything less than solar brilliance is worthless, and so we spend our lives spiraling toward the sea of paralysis, our wings melting not from proximity to divine fire, but from the heat of our own unrealistic expectations. Watch how this shadow operates in the sacred space of creativity. You sit down to write, and immediately it begins its assessment. This opening line is not brilliant enough. Surely a real writer would begin with something more profound, more clever, more perfect. And so you delete the line before it has even had a chance to lead you toward the second line, toward the paragraph, toward the messy middle where all authentic creation happens. You approach the canvas with a vision burning in your heart, and the shadow intercepts you at the threshold. You do not yet have the skill to execute this vision perfectly. Better to wait until you are more prepared, more worthy of this sacred image. And so the vision remains trapped in the realm of potential, like a butterfly that dies in its chrysalis because it was too afraid of the vulnerability required for emergence. You lift the instrument to create music, and the shadow strikes with surgical precision. This melody is not original enough, not sophisticated enough, not worthy of being heard by others. And so the song dies before its first breath, stillborn in service to an impossible standard that exists nowhere in the natural world. The tragic irony is that the perfectionist shadow destroys precisely what it claims to protect. In its zealous guardianship of our potential greatness, it ensures that this greatness never has the opportunity to develop, to mature, to become real. It is like a gardener who refuses to plant seeds because they are not yet flowers, not understanding that the journey from seed to bloom requires a willingness to begin with something small, imperfect, and full of unrealized potential. This shadow has learned to speak the language of the inner critic with devastating fluency. It knows exactly which phrases will stop your creative flow midstream. This is garbage. You're fooling yourself. Others will see right through this pretense. You have nothing original to offer. Why are you wasting everyone's time? These words land in the tender space of creative vulnerability, like poison arrows. And suddenly the flow stops, the channel closes, the connection to your authentic creative source gets severed. But beneath this harsh inner critic lies something even more painful. The wounded child who learned long ago that love was conditional upon performance, that worth was measured by achievement, that imperfection was a kind of betrayal. This child carries the unbearable burden of believing that unless their expression is perfect, they are not worthy of love, attention, or even existence. The perfectionist shadow, then, is not truly about creation at all. It is about survival. It is the psyche's misguided attempt to protect this wounded child from the inevitable pain of being seen, judged, and potentially rejected. Better to remain hidden behind the mask of unrealized potential than to risk the ego's death that comes with honest creative expression. Yet Jung reminds us that the shadow contains not only our rejected pain, but also our unrealized gold. Within the perfectionist shadow lies a genuine hunger for excellence, a deep love of beauty, a sincere desire to offer something meaningful to the world. The task is not to destroy this shadow, but to transform it, to liberate the gold from the lead, to separate the authentic desire for quality from the neurotic need for invulnerability. This transformation begins with a radical act of compassion toward the perfectionist shadow itself. Instead of hating this part of yourself for its paralyzing influence, you begin to understand its deeper motivation. It is trying to protect you from the very real pain of criticism, rejection, and failure. It has developed its impossible standards as a shield against the vulnerability that all authentic creation requires. But shields that protect us from pain also separate us from joy, from growth, from the profound satisfaction that comes with honest creative expression. The perfectionist shadow, in its zealous attempt to guard against disappointment, also guards against the possibility of genuine fulfillment. The path through this first deception requires a courage that the ego finds almost unbearable. The courage to begin badly, to create imperfectly, to share work that reveals your current limitations rather than your imagined potential. It requires a willingness to let the mask of perfection crack and crumble, to let the world see not the polished persona you have so carefully constructed, but the beautifully flawed human being who is actually doing the work of creation. This is the first death that all authentic creators must die, the death of the fantasy of effortless perfection, the demise of the illusion that real work can be produced without vulnerability, without risk, without the thousand small failures that are the necessary stepping stones toward mastery. Only when you are willing to let this first mask fall away can you begin to discover what lies beneath. Not the perfection you imagined, but something far more valuable, your authentic creative voice, with all its current limitations and all its unrealized potential for growth. In the sacred garden of your becoming, where the tender shoots of your authentic self reach toward an inner sun, there grows a tree whose roots run deeper than memory itself. Its bark is smooth as polished obsidian, its leaves shimmer with false promises, and its fruit, oh, its fruit bears the sweetest poison known to the human soul. This is the tree of comparison, and its serpent has been whispering in the ears of humanity since consciousness first gazed upon itself and found wanting. Listen closely, for this serpent speaks not with the crude hiss of obvious temptation, but with the sophisticated voice of reason itself. It does not slither toward you with fangs bared. Instead, it approaches as a helpful guide, offering what appears to be wisdom. Look, it says, pointing with elegant precision to the achievements of others. See how they shine while you remain in shadow. Observe their progress while you stumble. Witness their certainty while you drown in doubt. The serpent's second deception is perhaps the most insidious of all, for it takes the natural human capacity for inspiration and transforms it into a weapon of self-destruction. Where once you might have looked upon another's success and felt the stirring of possibility within your own breast, now you see only evidence of your inadequacy, the shadow, that rejected, unlived aspect of your psyche that Jung knew so well, uses these external mirrors not to reveal your potential, but to convince you of your poverty. This is the alchemy of comparison in reverse. Instead of transforming base metal into gold, it transforms gold into base metal. Your unique gifts become common stones. Your singular perspective becomes worthless opinion. Your authentic journey becomes a poor imitation of someone else's highlighted existence. The serpent has convinced you that there exists some cosmic scoreboard where souls are ranked and measured, where love is finite and success is a zero-sum game. But let us descend deeper into this psychological underworld, where the real deception reveals itself. The serpent does not merely show you others' achievements. It shows you their carefully curated presentations, their moment of triumph divorced from their years of struggle, their public victories stripped of their private defeats. It is a master of selective vision, this ancient trickster, showing you their noon while hiding their midnight, their harvest while concealing their seasons of barren ground. Jung understood that what we see in others often reflects what we cannot yet see in ourselves. The psychological phenomenon of projection means that when you gaze upon another's success with either admiration or envy, you are witnessing the shadow dance of your own unlived potential. The very qualities that trigger your comparison, their confidence, their creativity, their courage, exist as seeds within your own psyche, waiting for the proper conditions to bloom. Yet the serpent whispers a different story. It tells you that these qualities belong exclusively to others, that they were distributed at birth like lottery tickets, and yours came up empty. It convinces you that inspiration is a luxury you cannot afford, that hope is naive, that your dreams are too small or too large, too ordinary or too grandiose. In this way, comparison becomes not a bridge to possibility, but a wall against it. The Ouroboros, that ancient symbol of the serpent consuming its own tail, provides a perfect metaphor for this self-destructive cycle. Just as the mythical serpent devours itself in an endless loop, you consume your own progress by measuring it against impossible standards. Each step forward is immediately negated by the observation that someone else has taken 10. Each moment of pride is swallowed by the realization that your achievement pales beside another's. You become both predator and prey in this psychological cannibalism, eating away at your own substance until nothing remains but the hollow shell of what you might have been. This is what Jung called enantiodromia, the tendency of things to transform into their opposite. What begins as motivation becomes paralysis. What starts as inspiration becomes despair. What appears as self-improvement becomes self-destruction. The very energy that could fuel your growth is redirected into the engine of your own diminishment. Consider the peculiar mathematics of this serpentine logic. If someone else's light truly diminished your own, then every sunrise would make the world darker. Every star would steal brightness from the night. Every flower would drain beauty from the garden. Yet we know this is not how light works in the physical world, and it is not how it works in the realm of the soul either. Light is additive, not subtractive. One candle does not diminish another. Rather, together they create a constellation of illumination that neither could achieve alone. But the serpent of comparison operates according to the scarcity principle, that fundamental delusion that there is not enough. Not enough success, not enough recognition, not enough love, not enough space in the universe for all souls to shine simultaneously. It whispers that if another succeeds, your own success becomes less likely. If another is praised, less praise remains for you. If another is loved, you become less lovable by comparison. This scarcity mythology runs so deep in the human psyche that we rarely question its premises. We accept without examination the notion that human worth operates like a finite resource, that excellence is a limited commodity, that there exists some cosmic queue where we must wait our turn for happiness. The serpent exploits this ancient programming, using it to keep us locked in endless comparison rather than authentic creation. Yet here lies a profound paradox that Jung would have appreciated. The very people we compare ourselves to most destructively are often those who most clearly reflect our own unlived potential. The artist whose work triggers your deepest envy likely represents the creative force you have abandoned within yourself. The entrepreneur whose success fills you with bitter comparison likely mirrors the risk-taking courage you have buried beneath layers of safety and conformity. The speaker whose confidence you both admire and resent likely embodies the authentic voice you have been too afraid to develop. In this way, comparison reveals itself as a distorted form of recognition, the soul's attempt to see itself reflected in the world, but through the funhouse mirror of projection and shadow. What feels like evidence of your inadequacy is actually evidence of your unlived magnificence, demanding attention. Through the painful contrast of external achievement, the serpent's greatest trick is convincing you that these reflections are random, that your emotional responses to others' successes are merely petty jealousy or healthy admiration. It does not want you to recognize the deeper pattern, that you are always comparing yourself to those who embody what you most long to become. The pain of comparison is not the pain of inadequacy, it is the pain of recognition, the soul crying out for its own expression through the vehicle of another's success. This recognition leads us to one of Jung's most profound insights, that what we encounter in the external world is always, in some sense, a reflection of our internal landscape. The people who trigger our deepest comparison are not random tormentors sent to remind us of our limitations. They are teachers, mirrors, guides, pointing toward the unlived aspects of our own nature. They show us not what we lack, but what we carry in potential. The serpent, however, inverts this teaching, where psychology would say, this person reflects your unlived potential. The serpent whispers, this person proves your inherent lack. Where wisdom would suggest, their success illuminates your path. deception insists their success blocks your way. Where truth would reveal their light calls forth your own, the lie maintains their light extinguishes yours. This inversion is so complete, so seamless, that most people never question it. They accept the serpent's logic as natural law, as the way things simply are. They build their entire self-concept on the shifting sands of comparison, never realizing that they are measuring themselves against illusions, shadows, carefully constructed presentations that bear little resemblance to the full complexity of another's existence. The tragedy of this deception extends beyond personal suffering into the realm of collective diminishment. When individuals are locked in comparison, they cannot contribute their unique gifts to the world. Instead of adding their voice to the choir of human achievement, they remain silent, convinced that their song is unnecessary because others sing more beautifully. Instead of bringing their vision to life, they abandon it, certain that similar visions already exist in superior forms. In this way, the serpent of comparison does not merely wound individuals, it impoverishes the entire human experience. Each person who retreats into the shadows of inadequacy represents a loss to the collective, a unique perspective unexpressed, a singular gift ungiven, an irreplaceable contribution unmade. The serpent's success is measured not only in personal misery, but in cultural impoverishment, in the gradual graying of a world that desperately needs the full spectrum of human expression. Yet beneath the serpent's whispers, beneath the shadow's projections, beneath the ego's endless measuring and weighing, your authentic self waits with infinite patience. It knows what the serpent cannot understand, that you carry within you a flame that has never been lit in quite the same way before, a frequency of being that has never been sounded, a gift that can only be given through the vehicle of your unique existence. This flame does not flicker when others shine brightly. It burns more steadily in the presence of their light. It does not diminish when others succeed. It grows stronger through witnessing their courage. It does not fade when others are praised. It glows more warmly through appreciation of their gifts. For this flame is not fueled by scarcity, but by abundance, not by comparison, but by authentic expression, not by winning, but by showing up fully to the magnificent adventure of being uniquely, irreplaceably you. The serpent's second deception crumbles in the presence of this recognition. Comparison loses its sting when you understand that you are not competing in some cosmic tournament, but participating in a divine symphony where every voice is necessary, every instrument irreplaceable, every contribution sacred. The garden of your potential needs no comparison to other gardens. It needs only the patient tending of your authentic attention, the steady water of your commitment, the gentle light of your self-compassion. In this recognition, the poisonous tree begins its transformation, its bitter fruit sweetening into nourishment, its shadow-casting branches reaching not to block your light, but to offer shelter for your growth. The serpent itself, stripped of its deceptive power, reveals its true nature, not as enemy but as teacher, not as tormentor but as guide, leading you through the maze of projection back to the simple truth of your own irreplaceable being. Listen now to the echo that reverberates through the deepest corridors of your being, the sound of chains that you yourself have forged, link by precious link in the darkness of forgetting. We descend now into the third great deception, perhaps the most seductive of all shadow's offerings, the cave of victimhood, where powerlessness becomes a throne upon which the ego sits in terrible majesty, ruling over a kingdom of wounds. Here, in this subterranean realm of the psyche, the light of personal agency grows dim, filtered through layers upon layers of accumulated grievance, until what remains is but the faintest glow, enough to see the shadows dancing on the wall, but never enough to recognize them as mere projections of our own making. Like Plato's prisoners, we have grown so accustomed to the flickering phantoms that we mistake them for the whole of reality, forgetting that behind us burns the fire of authentic selfhood, waiting to be acknowledged. The cave of victimhood is not carved by external forces, though it may appear so to the inhabitant. No, this dwelling place is hollowed out by the persistent turning away from responsibility, by the gradual erosion of will that occurs when we choose the known suffering over the unknown liberation. It is the shadow's most cunning architectural feat, a prison that feels like a sanctuary, chains that masquerade as comfort, walls that whisper they are protection when they are, in truth, limitation. How did you arrive here, in this echoing chamber where your voice comes back to you distorted, where every cry for freedom bounces off stone walls and returns as confirmation of your captivity? The descent was so gradual, so reasonable at each step, that you hardly noticed the light growing dimmer behind you. Perhaps it began with a wound, real and raw and genuine in its initial pain. Perhaps someone you trusted betrayed that trust, or circumstance dealt you a blow that staggered your developing sense of self. The wound was legitimate. No one questions this truth. But watch now, with the unflinching gaze of the inner witness, how the shadow works with such wounds. Like a spider that senses the smallest vibration in its web, the shadow recognizes in genuine pain an opportunity to construct something far more enduring than healing, an identity built upon the foundation of having been wronged. You see, it whispers in the voice that sounds so much like your own that you cannot distinguish the speaker. You are not like others. Others may be expected to take responsibility for their lives, but you have been damaged. You are the exception to the rule of empowerment. And there is such dark comfort in this whisper, such relief in laying down the terrible burden of choice. For to be responsible is to stand naked in the wind of possibility, exposed to the anxiety of freedom, vulnerable to the accusation of failure. But to be a victim, here is safety of a kind. Here the ego can rest in the certainty of its innocence, can point to the wounds as evidence of worthiness, can demand from life and others a special consideration that ordinary humans are not owed. The cave grows larger with each story we tell ourselves about our powerlessness. Each recounting of old wounds carves the walls deeper, makes the ceiling higher, creates more space for the echo of grievance to reverberate. We become archaeologists of our own suffering, carefully cataloging each slight, each disappointment, each moment when life failed to meet our expectations. These artifacts of pain become the furnishings of our cave, comfortable in their familiarity, precious in their ability to explain why transformation remains always just beyond our reach. But look closer now at the quality of this comfort. Notice how it feeds upon itself, how each rehearsal of powerlessness requires a more elaborate justification, a more complex story to maintain the structure of victimhood, like an addiction that demands ever-increasing doses to achieve the same numbing effect. The cave of victimhood requires increasingly dramatic narratives of suffering to maintain its hold upon consciousness. The shadow, that clever architect, provides these narratives with masterful skill. It teaches us to interpret every difficulty as evidence of our special burden, every setback as confirmation of our unique suffering. A harsh word becomes persecution, a closed door becomes systematic exclusion, a moment of loneliness becomes evidence of fundamental unlovability. The shadow transforms the ordinary friction of human existence into proof of our victimhood, until we see ourselves as perpetually besieged by forces too powerful to resist. And yet, and this is the terrible genius of this deception, we simultaneously demand rescue while rejecting every ladder lowered into our depths. For to accept genuine help would be to acknowledge that escape is possible, and escape carries with it the terrifying implication that we were never truly trapped. The cave dweller learns to reach for help with one hand while pushing it away with the other, crying out for salvation while sabotaging every attempt at liberation. This is the enantiodromia that Jung understood so well, the way that extreme positions contain within themselves the seeds of their opposite. The absolute powerlessness claimed by the victim secretly conceals an absolute power, the power to remain unchanged, the power to defeat every would-be rescuer, the power to prove that transformation is impossible. In claiming total helplessness, we exercise a sovereignty more complete than any tyrant ever dreamed of wielding. The persona, that mask we wear in the world, learns to smile sadly and speak of healing while ensuring that no real healing occurs. It becomes expert in the language of growth while remaining fundamentally committed to stagnation. It can attend workshops and read books and engage in therapy while maintaining the core belief that it is too damaged for genuine transformation. The persona of the chronic victim is perhaps the most sophisticated of all personas. It appears to be doing the work of individuation while actually preventing it at every turn. But the unconscious, that vast realm beyond the cave's artificially narrowed boundaries, continues to send its messages. Dreams come in which we discover rooms in our house we never knew existed, or find ourselves capable of flying, or encounter wise figures who offer gifts we wake up too frightened to accept. The unconscious knows what the ego has forgotten, that we are not prisoners, but prisoners of our own making, not victims, but actors who have forgotten we are on a stage. Sometimes the pressure builds until cracks appear in the cave walls. Moments of clarity pierce through the carefully maintained darkness, and for an instant, we see our chains as they truly are, gossamer threads that could be broken with a single decisive movement. But these moments terrify the ego more than any external threat ever could, for they threaten the entire edifice of justified powerlessness upon which our identity has been built. The shadow rushes in with its emergency repairs. Don't listen to that voice. It doesn't understand your situation. Others might be able to change, but your wounds are different. Your circumstances are unique. That moment of clarity is just another trick, another way that life tries to blame you for what has been done to you. And so the cave walls are rebuilt, stronger than before, reinforced now against the terrible possibility of freedom. But Jung teaches us that every complex, every stuck pattern in the psyche carries within it the very energy needed for its own transformation. The cave of victimhood, for all its apparent solidity, is built from the same raw material as agency itself, the fundamental human capacity to choose our relationship to experience. The victim and the empowered self are not opposites but transformations of the same essential energy, like water that can exist as ice or steam depending upon the conditions applied to it. The key to liberation lies not in denying the wounds that led us into the cave, nor in minimizing the genuine difficulties that life has presented. The key lies in recognizing that our response to these conditions is where our true power has always resided. Between stimulus and response, as the wise ones have always known, lies the space where freedom dwells, the infinitesimal gap where choice lives, where the human spirit asserts its sovereignty over circumstance. To emerge from the cave of victimhood is not to deny suffering, but to alchemically transform it from lead into gold, from evidence of powerlessness into proof of the soul's indestructible capacity for meaning-making. Every wound we have endured, every injustice we have suffered, every moment when life fell short of our hopes, all of these become not disqualifications from empowerment, but the very material from which empowerment is forged. The shadow that led us into the cave must now become our guide toward the light, for it is only the shadow that knows the way we came, only the shadow that understands the intricate geography of our particular prison. What was once the voice of limitation becomes the voice of hard truth. You built this place choice by choice, story by story, and if you built it, you can unbuild it. If you descended, you can ascend. If you have been the author of your captivity, you can be the author of your freedom. This is the great reversal, the enantiodromia that marks true psychological transformation. The very depths of claimed powerlessness become the foundation for authentic empowerment. The elaborate story of victimhood, when seen through the eyes of consciousness rather than unconsciousness, reveals itself as evidence of our incredible creative power. The power that built such an elaborate prison can certainly build the palace of actualized selfhood. The cave of victimhood dissolves not through force, but through recognition, not through denial of our wounds, but through the mature acknowledgement that we are more than our wounds, larger than our circumstances, deeper than our suffering. We are the consciousness that experiences pain, not the pain itself. We are the awareness that observes difficulty, not the difficulty itself. We are the eternal witness that watches all conditions arise and pass away, touched by them but not ultimately defined by them. And in this recognition, the third great deception loses its power to deceive. The cave walls become transparent, revealing themselves as nothing more than crystallized beliefs. The chains fall away, shown to be made of the same substance as the thoughts that forged them. The shadows on the wall are seen for what they have always been, projections of our own mind, given life by our attention and sustained by our belief. To walk out of the cave of victimhood is to be born again into the realm of conscious choice, to remember what we temporarily forgot in the darkness, that we are not at the mercy of our story, but the authors of it, not victims of our experience, but the consciousness in which all experience arises and passes away, leaves its gift, and moves on toward the ever greater becoming that is our birthright and our calling. In the vast desert of our existence, where each day stretches before us like endless dunes of possibility, there shimmers always on the horizon the most seductive of all illusions, the mirage of tomorrow. It dances there in the heat waves of our imagination, that perfect oasis where our true life awaits, where we will finally become the person we were meant to be, where our dreams will unfold with the effortless grace we have always envisioned. The shadow, that master deceiver, has painted this mirage with exquisite detail. Tomorrow, it whispers, we will write the novel. Tomorrow, we will start the business. Tomorrow, we will have the difficult conversation, make the necessary change, take the leap of faith that transforms everything. Tomorrow gleams with the promise of perfection, because it exists only in the realm of potential, untainted by the messy reality of actual living. This is perhaps the shadow's most elegant trap, for it uses our own vision against us. It takes the very thing that could liberate us, our capacity to imagine a better future, and transforms it into the prison that keeps us forever suspended between longing and fulfillment. We become like Tantalus, that tragic figure from Greek mythology, forever reaching for fruit that retreats just as our fingers brush its skin, forever bending to drink from waters that recede the moment our lips approach. But what crime did we commit to deserve such punishment? What hubris earned us this eternal frustration? The answer lies not in any external transgression, but in our relationship with time itself, in our deep misunderstanding of how transformation actually occurs. The shadow convinces us that there exists a mythical moment called the right time, that perfect convergence of circumstances when action will feel natural, when we will possess all the knowledge we need. when fear will magically dissolve and courage will flow through us like sunlight through clear water. It sells us the fantasy that meaningful change happens in grand gestures, in perfect moments of readiness, in the dramatic transformation that sweeps away all struggle and doubt. This is the lie that keeps us perpetually preparing for a life we are never quite ready to live. We research instead of create, plan instead of begin, wait for inspiration instead of cultivating discipline. The shadow feeds on this delay, growing stronger with each postponed decision, each deferred dream, each day that passes in the comfortable agony of unrealized potential. Procrastination, in this light, reveals itself not as laziness but as a sophisticated form of perfectionism. It is the shadow's way of protecting us from the vulnerability of imperfect action, from the humiliation of beginning badly, from the terror of discovering that our dreams, when finally pursued, might not unfold exactly as we imagined. Better to keep them safely wrapped in the golden tissue paper of someday than to risk their tarnishing in the harsh light of reality. The shadow whispers that our current circumstances are not ideal, that we lack the resources, the time, the knowledge, the support we need to begin. It points to all the people who seem to have advantages we lack, who started earlier, who have clearer paths or better connections. It creates an impossible standard of readiness that ensures we will never feel prepared enough to take the first step. But here lies the deeper deception. The shadow has convinced us that our dreams exist somewhere outside of us, in some future version of ourselves that we must become worthy of claiming. It has created a false separation between who we are now and who we could be, as if they were different people entirely. We wait to become brave enough for courage, wise enough for wisdom, loving enough for love, not understanding that these qualities emerge only through their practice, only through the willingness to embody them imperfectly in this moment. The mirage of tomorrow is particularly seductive because it preserves the purity of our vision. In the realm of potential, our novel is already a masterpiece. Our relationship is already perfect. Our life is already transformed. The shadow knows that beginning anything means accepting the gap between vision and current ability, between the perfection in our minds and the imperfection of our first attempts. It convinces us that this gap is evidence of inadequacy, rather than the natural starting point of all mastery. Time, in the shadow's mythology, is linear and scarce. There is never enough of it, or there is too much of it to fill meaningfully. We are either rushing toward deadlines or drowning in empty hours, either too busy for our dreams or too paralyzed by their enormity to begin. The shadow creates a distorted relationship with time that keeps us forever out of sync with the natural rhythm of creation, which happens not in the dramatic gestures of someday, but in the quiet consistency of right now. The truth that the shadow works so hard to obscure is that transformation happens in ordinary moments, through ordinary actions by ordinary people who simply refuse to wait for extraordinary circumstances. The novel gets written not in a burst of inspired genius, but in daily sentences, often mediocre ones. The relationship heals not through a single perfect conversation, but through countless imperfect attempts at understanding. The life changes not through a dramatic revelation, but through small, consistent choices that compound over time like interest in the bank of becoming. Jung understood that the psyche operates on what he called kairos rather than chronos, not mechanical clock time, but meaningful time, the pregnant moments when the soul is ready for growth. These moments of kairos cannot be scheduled or manufactured. They arise naturally when we are present to what is, rather than perpetually focused on what might be. They come not to those who wait for them, but to those who recognize them in the midst of imperfect action. The shadow's mirage of tomorrow also serves another function. It allows us to maintain our identity as someone who has important dreams, while avoiding the risk of discovering our actual capabilities. As long as our potential remains unrealized, it can remain unlimited. As long as we never test our dreams against reality, we never have to confront the possibility that they might require more effort, more growth, more courage than we initially imagined. But potential energy becomes kinetic only through movement. The seed contains the entire tree, but only soil and sunlight and the willingness to crack open can release that magnificent possibility. The shadow would keep us forever seeds, perfect in our contained potential, safe from the vulnerability of growth. The desert of the present moment, which the shadow paints as barren and insufficient, is actually the only fertile ground we will ever have. This moment, with all its imperfections and limitations, is where life is actually happening. This moment is where love can be given, where words can be written, where steps can be taken, where dreams can begin their messy, beautiful transformation from vision into reality. The mirage of tomorrow retreats not because it is cruel, but because it was never meant to be reached. It exists to draw us forward, to pull us toward growth and change and becoming. But the shadow has perverted this natural function, turning tomorrow into a destination rather than a direction, a place to arrive rather than a force that moves us. Breaking free from this deception requires recognizing that the perfect moment is not coming, it is here, disguised as this imperfect, insufficient, beautifully ordinary now. Behold the citadel that rises from the mists of the ego's highest peak, the fortress of pride, that magnificent and terrible structure built stone by stone from the mortar of false superiority. Its walls gleam like polished obsidian in the light of consciousness, reflecting back only what the defended self wishes to see. A monument to its own imagined greatness, a testimony to the illusion that it has already arrived at the summit of understanding. Here, in these rarefied heights where the air grows thin with isolation, the shadow has established its most sophisticated stronghold. No crude weapons guard these ramparts, no obvious aggression or visible malice. Instead, the sentries that patrol these walls are dressed in the elegant uniforms of intellectual superiority, carrying shields emblazoned with righteous certainty, wielding swords forged from the brittle metal of defensive argumentation. This is perhaps the shadow's most seductive deception, for it does not announce itself as pride. It arrives wearing the mask of wisdom, speaking in the measured tones of authority, carrying credentials that spell out knowledge and experience in letters of gold. It whispers to the ego, "You have worked hard to reach this understanding. You have earned the right to be certain. Why should you descend from this hard-won height to fumble once again in the darkness of not knowing?" The shadow of pride understands the deepest architecture of the ego's fears. It knows that beneath every defensive argument lies the trembling terror of being exposed as inadequate, of having one's carefully constructed identity revealed as provisional, partial, perpetually incomplete. And so it offers the ego a false sanctuary, the illusion that growth can end, that learning can cease, that somewhere in the journey of becoming there exists a final destination where uncertainty no longer threatens and ignorance no longer calls. Watch how this shadow operates in the sacred space of dialogue, in those moments when life offers us the gift of perspective beyond our own. Another soul approaches with a different understanding, a fresh insight, a challenge to our established way of seeing. The fortress of pride immediately sounds its alarms. Danger! Threat to the established order! Prepare the defenses! And suddenly, what could have been an opportunity for expansion becomes a battlefield where being right matters more than being whole. The ego, from its elevated position within the fortress, looks down upon this approaching perspective and immediately begins its assessment. This understanding is inferior to my own. This person lacks my experience, my insight, my hard-won wisdom. They are trying to diminish me, to pull me down from the height I have rightfully achieved. And so the drawbridge remains raised, the gates stay barred, and the possibility of learning withers in the shadow of defensive pride. Jung recognized this as one of the most tragic forms of psychological imprisonment, the way our attachments to being right become chains that bind us to the very limitations we most need to transcend. The more desperately we cling to our current understanding, the more certainly we close ourselves off from the understanding that could transform us. The higher we build our walls of certainty, the more surely we guarantee our exile from the flowing river of growth that runs through the valley below. Consider the myth of Narcissus, that ancient mirror held up to the prideful soul. There by the pool's edge sits the beautiful youth, captivated by his own reflection, unable to tear his gaze away from the image that seems so perfect, so complete, so worthy of endless contemplation. He does not see the forest around him, the changing seasons, the other forms of life that pass by unnoticed. His world has collapsed to the circumference of his own reflection, and in this collapse he slowly wastes away, not from lack of beauty, but from the inability to see beauty anywhere beyond himself. This is the precise predicament of the prideful shadow. It becomes so enchanted with its own reflection, its own ideas, its own perspective, its own way of understanding, that the vast world beyond this reflection simply ceases to exist. The ego, gazing into the pool of its own certainty, loses the capacity to see the infinite forms of wisdom that surround it, waiting to be recognized, integrated, celebrated. The fortress of pride operates through a series of increasingly sophisticated defensive mechanisms. The first line of defense is simple dismissal. This perspective is obviously flawed. When that fails to maintain the ego's comfort, the shadow deploys its second strategy, character assassination. This person is clearly not qualified to challenge my understanding. If the threat persists, the third weapon emerges, intellectual superiority. While they may have a point, they clearly don't understand the deeper implications that I can see. Each defense serves the same function, to maintain the ego's position while avoiding the vulnerable necessity of actually engaging with the challenging perspective. The shadow of pride would rather be right in isolation than risk being wrong in community. It would rather maintain its current limitations than submit to the uncertainty that all genuine learning requires. But observe the cruel irony embedded in this defensive posture. The very thing the prideful shadow claims to protect, knowledge, wisdom, understanding, slowly withers within the fortress walls. Cut off from the nourishing dialogue with perspectives beyond its own, the ego's understanding becomes stagnant, circular, increasingly divorced from the living reality it claims to comprehend. True knowledge, Jung reminds us, is not a fortress, but a flowing river. It does not seek to defend itself, but to merge with other streams, to find its way toward ever greater bodies of understanding. Wisdom is not a static achievement, but a dynamic process, always ready to be enriched by encounters with the unknown, the challenging, the initially incomprehensible. The shadow of pride fears this fluidity because it threatens the ego's sense of solid ground. To admit ignorance, to say, I don't know, or I hadn't considered that perspective, or you may be right, feels like a kind of psychological death. The carefully constructed identity as one who knows begins to crumble, and beneath it, the ego glimpses the terrifying truth that it is still learning, still growing, still fundamentally incomplete. Yet this terror is itself an illusion, another deception of the prideful shadow. The death it fears is not the death of the authentic self, but the death of a false construct, the image of the ego as finished, complete, beyond the need for further growth. What lies beyond this death is not diminishment but expansion, not humiliation but liberation, not the end of knowledge, but its true beginning. The fortress of pride keeps the ego trapped in a kind of psychological solitary confinement. Within its walls, the same thoughts circle endlessly, the same assumptions go unchallenged, the same blind spots remain forever hidden. The ego congratulates itself on its clarity while slowly losing touch with the very reality it claims to understand so well. This shadow is particularly cunning because it disguises stagnation as stability, defensive rigidity as strength. It convinces the ego that changing its mind is a sign of weakness rather than wisdom, that admitting error is a form of defeat rather than the very mechanism through which learning occurs. Under its influence, the ego begins to fear growth itself, because growth requires the death of what we thought we knew, in service to what we might come to understand. The prideful shadow speaks in the voice of injured dignity. Why should you humble yourself before this lesser understanding? You have paid your dues, done your work, earned your place. To question your conclusions now would be to betray all the effort you have invested in reaching them. This voice carries the seductive logic of sunk costs, as if the energy invested in arriving at current understanding somehow obligates us to defend it against all challenges, regardless of their merit. But Jung teaches us that the psyche's greatest treasures are often hidden in the places we most resist exploring, the perspectives that trigger our strongest defensive reactions, the ideas that make our prideful shadow recoil with particular intensity. These may be precisely the gateways through which our next phase of growth wishes to enter. The transformation of prideful shadow begins with a radical reorientation of what it means to not know. Instead of experiencing ignorance as a failure, we begin to recognize it as an invitation. Instead of treating uncertainty as a threat, we welcome it as a teacher. Instead of defending our current understanding as if it were a final achievement, we hold it lightly, ready to let it evolve in response to new information, fresh perspective, deeper insight. This requires a courage that the ego finds almost unbearable. The courage to be wrong, to appear foolish, to acknowledge the provisional nature of even our most cherished beliefs. It demands a willingness to step down from the fortress walls and walk again as a beginner in the valley of not knowing, where every encounter carries the potential for transformation. The prideful shadow fears this descent because it mistakes it for degradation. But those who have made this journey know a secret. The valley is where life actually happens. The fortress may offer the illusion of safety and superiority, but it is in the valley where we encounter other pilgrims, where we discover perspectives that would have remained invisible from our elevated isolation, where we remember that learning is not a destination, but a way of traveling through the mystery of existence. In the valley of not knowing, we discover that admitting ignorance is not a humiliation, but a liberation. Each "I don't know" opens a door that was previously closed. Each willingness to be wrong creates space for something more true to emerge. Each surrender of defensive certainty allows the authentic self to breathe more freely, to move more gracefully, to engage more genuinely with the endless complexity of being human. The fortress of pride, for all its apparent strength, is built on the shifting sands of ego inflation. Its walls, which seem so solid from within, are actually as fragile as the false superiority that constructed them. One genuine encounter with authentic humility, one honest acknowledgement of limitation, one courageous descent into not knowing, and the entire structure begins to dissolve, not into destruction, but into the flowing river of continuous becoming that was always waiting to carry us forward into fuller expressions of our authentic selves. Listen, do you hear it? That sweet, haunting melody drifting across the waters of your consciousness, calling you back to the familiar shores of what you have always known. This is the siren song of comfort, and it may be the most seductive deception your shadow has ever composed. Unlike the harsh voices of the previous deceptions, the critic's sharp tongue, the comparison's bitter poison, this voice comes as a friend, as a protector, as the wise counselor who only wants what is best for you. Why venture into uncertain waters? It croons with maternal tenderness. Why risk the storms of change when you have found this sheltered harbor? Here, in the known territories of your carefully constructed life, you are safe. Here, where every path has been walked before, every corner mapped and measured, you need never fear the monsters that lurk in uncharted seas. The siren song is beautiful precisely because it contains threads of truth, woven through its fabric of limitation. Safety is precious. Stability has value. The familiar does offer a kind of peace that the unknown cannot provide. But like all of the shadow's deceptions, this one takes a genuine human need and transforms it into a prison, takes a natural instinct and weaponizes it against your soul's deepest calling. Jung understood that within every psyche dwells both the impulse toward security and the drive toward growth, and that these two forces exist in eternal tension. The ego, with its primary mandate of survival and self-preservation, naturally gravitates toward the known, the predictable, the controllable. It seeks to minimize risk, to maintain the status quo, to keep you alive and functioning within established parameters. This is not wrong. It is necessary for basic survival. But the self, that deeper center of your being that Jung saw as the true goal of psychological development, calls you toward something far more dangerous and infinitely more magnificent, the full realization of your unique potential. The self cares nothing for safety. It cares only for authenticity. It will sacrifice comfort for truth, security for growth, the known for the possible. And this creates a fundamental conflict within the psyche, a sacred tension that the shadow exploits with masterful precision. The comfort zone, that seemingly benign concept that has become shorthand for limitation, reveals itself under deeper examination as a complex psychological phenomenon. It is not merely about physical safety or material security, though these elements play their part. Rather, it represents the entire constellation of beliefs, behaviors, relationships, and routines that constitute your familiar reality. It is the country of your identity, with its own customs, laws, and boundaries, and like any nation, it resists invasion from foreign influences, even when those influences come bearing gifts of expansion and possibility. Within this psychological homeland, the shadow has established itself as the minister of defense, constantly surveying the borders for threats to the established order. It has developed sophisticated early warning systems that sound the alarm whenever growth appears on the horizon. Change, in any form, registers as danger. New possibilities are classified as risks. Dreams and aspirations are marked as potential sources of disruption to the carefully maintained equilibrium of your limited but predictable existence. The siren song becomes the shadow's most effective weapon in this campaign of containment. Where other deceptions work through pain and fear, this one operates through pleasure and relief. It does not threaten you with disaster if you step outside your comfort zone. Instead, it promises you sanctuary if you remain within it. It paints vivid pictures of all the terrible things that could happen if you pursue your dreams, while simultaneously offering you the sweet nectar of perpetual safety if you abandon them. Remember, the siren whispers, what happened to Icarus when he flew too close to the sun? Remember all those who reached too high and fell too far. Is it not wiser to be grateful for what you have than to risk everything for what you might achieve? Is contentment not preferable to ambition? Is peace not worth more than passion? This is the insidious genius of the comfort zone deception. It disguises stagnation as wisdom, limitation as gratitude, fear as prudence. It takes the genuine human capacity for appreciation and transforms it into a cage. It convinces you that wanting more from life is greedy, that dreaming of greater possibilities is ungrateful, that the stirring of your soul toward expansion is nothing more than dangerous dissatisfaction with perfectly adequate circumstances. Yet beneath this reasonable exterior lies a profound violence against your essential nature. For the human soul, by its very design, is not meant for stagnation. It is meant for growth, for exploration, for the endless unfolding of potential into reality. To convince a soul to remain static is like convincing a river to stop flowing, a flower to stop blooming, a bird to stop singing. It violates the fundamental principle of life itself, which is movement, change, evolution toward greater complexity and consciousness. The golden cage of comfort becomes particularly insidious because it often contains genuine gold. Your comfort zone may include real achievements, meaningful relationships, valuable skills, and legitimate sources of satisfaction. The shadow does not typically construct its prisons from pure misery. That would be too easy to escape. Instead, it builds them from partial fulfillment, from enough satisfaction to make you reluctant to leave, but not enough to truly nourish your soul's deepest hungers. This creates what Jung might have recognized as a state of psychological purgatory, neither the hell of obvious suffering that would motivate immediate change, nor the heaven of authentic fulfillment that would make change unnecessary. Instead, you exist in a liminal space of good enough, where the pain of staying feels manageable and the uncertainty of leaving feels overwhelming. The siren's song grows stronger during times of transition, those natural life passages where the psyche is already stirring toward transformation. It calls to you most seductively when you are on the verge of breakthrough, when the chrysalis of your current identity is beginning to crack and the possibility of metamorphosis hovers in the air. In these moments, the shadow mobilizes all its resources to pull you back to the familiar shores of who you have always been. This is foolishness, it sings. You are not meant for such grand transformations. You are meant for the quiet life, the safe life, the life that asks nothing extraordinary of you. Why torture yourself with impossible dreams when you could simply accept your limitations and find peace within them? But here lies the deepest deception of all, that comfort and growth are mutually exclusive, that you must choose between safety and authenticity, between peace and passion. The siren's song is built on the false premise that these represent either-or choices, when in truth they can become both and realities for those brave enough to sail beyond the familiar horizons of their current existence. True comfort, not the pseudo-comfort of stagnation, but the genuine comfort that comes from alignment with your deepest truth, can only be found through the courage to leave false comfort behind. Real safety, not the brittle safety of avoided risks, but the unshakable safety that comes from trusting your own capacity to navigate whatever challenges arise, emerges only through the willingness to venture into uncertain waters. The siren's song loses its power when you recognize it not as the voice of wisdom, but as the voice of fear disguised as reason, when you understand that the greatest risk is not the risk of failure in pursuit of your dreams, but the risk of success in avoiding them, the success of living an entire life in the shallows when you were designed for the depths. Your soul knows the difference between the siren's false promise and the authentic call of your destiny. It knows that you were not born to hide in harbors, no matter how beautiful, but to explore the vast oceans of possibility that stretch beyond every horizon of your current imagination. In the deepest chamber of the soul's architecture, where even the bravest explorers of consciousness fear to venture, there dwells a phantom so ancient, so pervasive, that it has become like the very air we breathe, invisible until we learn to see, inaudible until we learn to listen for its whispered poison. This is the specter of not enough, the seventh and perhaps most fundamental deception that the shadow weaves through every thread of human experience. Here, in this haunted hall of mirrors, every reflection shows us what we lack. Every achievement becomes evidence of how much further we have yet to go. Every moment of love received becomes a measurement against the love we imagine we need. Every success becomes a spotlight, illuminating all the ways we remain insufficient. The phantom moves through our days like a cold wind, transforming the gold of present abundance into the lead of perpetual longing. Listen carefully now to its voice, for it speaks in tones so familiar they have become indistinguishable from our own thoughts. You are not smart enough, it whispers, as you solve problems that would have baffled your younger self. You are not beautiful enough, it murmurs as friends seek your company and strangers smile at your approach. You are not successful enough, it declares as you accomplish what once seemed impossible. You are not spiritual enough, it intones as you touch moments of genuine transcendence. The phantom of not enough is the master alchemist of dissatisfaction, possessing the dark magic to transmute any experience of sufficiency into fresh evidence of inadequacy. It is the thief that steals into the treasury of our accomplishments and makes them vanish before our very eyes, leaving us standing in what appears to be an empty vault, wondering where all our efforts have gone. This is not mere psychological quirk or unfortunate habit of mind. This is the shadow's most sophisticated creation, the masterpiece of its deceptive artistry, for the phantom of not enough serves as the foundation upon which all other deceptions are built. The fear of abandonment feeds upon our sense of not being lovable enough. The imposter syndrome draws its power from our conviction that we are not capable enough. The perfectionist's prison is constructed from the belief that we are not flawless enough. The people-pleasing compulsion stems from our certainty that we are not acceptable enough as we are, and so we find ourselves in the position of King Midas, whose story the ancient Greeks told as a warning about the very curse we have embraced. Everything we touch in our quest for enough becomes gold, cold, lifeless, unable to nourish the soul that hungers for genuine connection and meaning. Our relationships become transactions in which we calculate our worth by what we can provide. Our achievements become golden statues that we admire but cannot embrace. Our very lives become monuments to accumulation rather than celebrations of being. The phantom teaches us to live in a future that never arrives, the magical moment when we will finally have enough money, enough recognition, enough love, enough wisdom, enough spiritual attainment to feel complete. It creates what Jung understood as the eternal postponement of life, the endless deferral of satisfaction to some imaginary tomorrow when all conditions will be perfect and all deficiencies will be remedied. But observe now how this phantom feeds upon itself, how it grows stronger with every attempt to satisfy its demands. Each time we achieve what we thought would be enough, the phantom simply raises the bar, moves the goalposts, redefines adequacy to ensure that we remain always in pursuit, never in possession. The successful entrepreneur discovers they need more success. The beloved person realizes they need more love. The accomplished artist sees only how much more they need to accomplish. This is the phantom's most cunning trick. It uses our very achievements as evidence of our insufficiency. Look, it says, pointing to our successes, you were able to accomplish this much, which proves you could have accomplished more. Your ability to achieve reveals the gap between what you did and what you could have done. Your capacity for love shows how much love you have withheld. Your moments of wisdom highlight your vast ignorance. The persona, that mask we wear in the world's theater, becomes the phantom's willing accomplice in this deception. It learns to perform adequacy while feeling inadequate, to display confidence while harboring deep uncertainty, to present completion while experiencing constant lack. The persona becomes expert at acquisition, acquiring not just material goods but experiences, relationships, knowledge, even spiritual attainments, all in service of the phantom's insatiable hunger. And yet, like all of the shadow's deceptions, this one contains within it the seeds of its own dissolution, for the phantom of not enough is itself evidence of something profound, the soul's recognition that it is made for infinity, designed for wholeness, created for a fulfillment that transcends any particular achievement or accumulation. The very existence of this hunger points to the reality of what it hungers for. Jung understood this paradox deeply. He saw that the neurosis of modern humanity, this perpetual sense of insufficiency, was actually a misdirected spiritual longing. What we take to be evidence of our inadequacy is actually proof of our divine nature, our connection to something larger than our small, separate selves. The phantom of not enough is the shadow's distortion of the soul's legitimate yearning for union with its source. But the shadow, in its cleverness, teaches us to seek this infinite fulfillment through finite means. It convinces us that enough money will provide security, that enough recognition will provide worth, that enough pleasure will provide joy, that enough knowledge will provide wisdom. And when these strategies inevitably fail, for how can the finite ever satisfy the infinite? The phantom uses their failure as proof that we simply haven't accumulated enough of them yet. This is the hamster wheel of human suffering, the endless cycle that keeps us running but never arriving. We pursue more because what we have isn't enough, but no amount of more can ever be enough because we are seeking infinite fulfillment through finite accumulation. The phantom ensures that the very solution we apply to the problem of not enough only deepens the problem, like drinking salt water to quench thirst. The unconscious, that vast realm of forgotten wisdom, sends us dreams and symbols trying to awaken us from this trance. We dream of being already wealthy beyond measure, of being surrounded by love we cannot see, of possessing talents we refuse to acknowledge. We dream of finding rooms in our house filled with treasures we never knew we owned. But we wake and dismiss these dreams as fantasy, returning to the phantom's harsh daylight where scarcity reigns supreme. Sometimes life itself intervenes with what Jung called numinous experiences, moments when the veil is lifted and we see clearly that we are already complete, already enough, already whole. In these moments, the phantom's voice falls silent, and we experience the profound peace of being rather than the endless anxiety of becoming. We taste the truth that all spiritual traditions have pointed toward, that what we seek is what we already are. But these moments terrify the ego that has built its entire identity around inadequacy. To be enough as we are would mean the death of the self that has spent its entire existence trying to become enough. It would mean acknowledging that all our strategies for improvement, all our efforts at accumulation, all our attempts at transformation have been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of our nature. And so the phantom rushes back in with its emergency repairs. That was just a temporary high, a moment of delusion. Look around you. See how much you still lack, how far you still have to go. That feeling of completeness was just your ego trying to make you complacent. Don't be fooled by such dangerous self-satisfaction. And we return to the familiar comfort of our inadequacy, the known suffering of our insufficiency. But the awakening consciousness begins to see through this final deception. It recognizes that the phantom of not enough is not describing reality, but creating it. It understands that the sense of insufficiency is not evidence of actual lack, but evidence of misperception. It realizes that what we have been calling not enough is actually the infinite nature of our being, mistakenly interpreted through the lens of the finite ego. This is the great reversal that marks the end of the phantom's reign. What we have experienced as evidence of our inadequacy is revealed as proof of our divine nature. The hunger that never could be satisfied by any finite accumulation is recognized as the soul's remembrance of its infinite source. The restlessness that no achievement could cure is seen as the movement of spirit itself, expressing itself through our human form. The phantom of not enough dissolves not through the acquisition of more, but through the recognition of what has always been present. It vanishes not because we finally become enough, but because we remember that we have never been anything other than enough. It loses its power not through our improvement, but through our acceptance of the self that needs no improvement. This recognition requires what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to hold paradox without collapsing it into simplicity. We must somehow hold both the legitimate desire for growth and the complete acceptance of what is. We must embrace both the soul's longing for expression and the truth of its essential wholeness. We must honor both the human journey of becoming and the divine truth of being. In this holding of paradox, the phantom transforms from tormentor to teacher. Its very existence points us toward the truth it has been concealing, that we are not separate beings trying to accumulate enough to feel complete, but expressions of completeness itself, playing at the game of becoming. The hunger it created becomes sacred hunger, the longing that draws us not toward more accumulation, but toward deeper recognition of what we are. And in this recognition, all the other deceptions begin to crumble. The fear of abandonment dissolves when we realize we can never be separated from our true nature. The imposter syndrome vanishes when we see that there is no one to impersonate but ourselves. The perfectionist's prison opens when we understand that we are already perfect expressions of imperfection. The people-pleasing compulsion ends when we know that pleasing others cannot add to or subtract from our essential worth. The phantom of not enough, revealed at last as the guardian of the threshold to our own completeness, steps aside and bows deeply. Its work is finished. The soul it was meant to torture into awakening has finally remembered its true nature. The deception it was meant to maintain has served its purpose and dissolved in the light of recognition. What remains is not the absence of desire, but the transformation of desire from seeking completion to expressing completeness. What remains is not the end of growth, but the beginning of growth that springs from wholeness rather than from lack. What remains is not the cessation of hunger, but the recognition that the hunger itself is sacred, the very movement of the infinite expressing itself through finite form, the eternal dance of spirit knowing itself through the beautiful, terrible, magnificent experience of being human. In the medieval laboratories of the alchemists, where science and mysticism danced together in the flickering light of furnaces, the great work began not with the addition of precious metals, but with the patient heating of base matter until its true nature was revealed. The prima materia, that raw, unformed substance, had to endure the fire before it could be transformed. So too must we place ourselves in the crucible of consciousness, allowing the alchemical fire of awareness to burn away our illusions until we can see clearly what has been hidden in the darkness of our own psyche. This is the moment of profound shift in our journey, the transition from being unconsciously driven by our shadow to consciously recognizing its presence and purpose. It is the difference between being swept away by an invisible current and finally seeing the river that has been carrying us. The shadow, which has operated through stealth and misdirection, must now face the penetrating light of awareness, and we, who have been its unwitting servants, must learn to become its conscious partners. The recognition of the shadow is not a gentle awakening, but a burning. It is the phoenix fire that consumes everything we thought we knew about ourselves, revealing the golden essence that lies beneath our carefully constructed self-image. This burning is what the alchemists called the nigredo, the blackening phase, the first stage of the great work where all false structures must be dissolved before the true gold can emerge. At first, this fire feels destructive as we begin to see the patterns of our self-sabotage with startling clarity, as we recognize the subtle ways we have been undermining our own growth, betraying our own dreams, and sabotaging our own happiness. The heat of recognition can feel unbearable. We see how our perfectionism has been a mask for fear, how our procrastination has been a way of avoiding the risk of authentic failure, how our need to be right has cost us the opportunity to learn and grow. This is the dark night of the soul that mystics have written about for centuries. Not the absence of light, but the moment when we finally see clearly how much of our suffering has been self-created. It is humbling in the most profound sense, stripping away the comfortable stories we have told ourselves about why our lives have unfolded as they have. The victim realizes their complicity. The perfectionist sees their paralysis. The procrastinator recognizes their fear. But here, in this moment of seeming devastation, lies the seed of liberation. For what we discover in the fire of recognition is not that we are broken or flawed beyond repair, but that we are unconsciously powerful. The very mechanisms that have been working against us reveal themselves as misdirected strength, as creative force flowing in destructive channels, as love turned inside out. The shadow, we begin to understand, is not our enemy, but our teacher. It has been trying to get our attention through the only means available to it, through symptoms, through sabotage, through the repetition of painful patterns that finally become too obvious to ignore. Each act of self-destruction carries within it a message, a piece of coded wisdom that the shadow has been trying to deliver to our conscious minds. The perfectionist's paralysis, when seen through the alchemical fire, reveals itself as a deep reverence for excellence, a sensitivity to beauty and quality that has been corrupted by fear. The procrastinator's delay unveils a wisdom about timing, an intuitive understanding that not all action is beneficial, that sometimes the soul needs to ripen before it can bear fruit. The self-critic's harsh voice transforms into the voice of the inner teacher, demanding not perfection but authenticity, not flawlessness but genuine effort. This recognition requires what Jung called a circumambulation, a careful walking around the phenomenon, observing it from all angles without immediately trying to fix or change it. Like astronomers studying a distant star, we must first map the territory of our shadow before we can understand its nature. We watch our patterns with the detached fascination of a scientist, noting when the self-sabotage appears, what triggers it, how it operates, what purpose it might be serving. The alchemical fire burns away our tendency to judge these patterns as simply bad or wrong. In the heat of consciousness, we begin to see the intelligence operating even in our most destructive behaviors. The part of us that sabotages relationships might be protecting us from the vulnerability of genuine intimacy. The part that procrastinates on creative projects might be guarding us against the exposure that comes with authentic self-expression. The part that maintains impossible standards might be preserving our connection to an ideal of excellence that inspires us, even as it paralyzes us. This shift in perspective from enemy to teacher, from pathology to misdirected gift, is the beginning of true transformation. For as long as we are at war with aspects of ourselves, we remain divided, spending enormous energy in internal conflict. But when we can recognize the shadow as a part of ourselves that has been trying to help, albeit through unconscious and often counterproductive means, we can begin the work of conscious collaboration. The fire of recognition also illuminates the ways our shadow has been a source of creativity and vitality in our lives. Jung observed that our complexes, those emotionally charged clusters of unconscious material, are not just problems to be solved, but also sources of energy and inspiration. The artist's melancholy, the entrepreneur's restlessness, the healer's wounded sensitivity, these shadows carry within them the very gifts that make us unique and valuable to the world. In the crucible of self-awareness, we begin to understand that integration is not about eliminating the shadow, but about transforming our relationship with it. The goal is not to become shadowless, an impossible and ultimately undesirable state, but to become conscious of our shadow, to develop a relationship with it based on awareness rather than unconscious identification. This is delicate work, requiring both courage and compassion. The fire of recognition can easily become the fire of self-condemnation if we are not careful. The shadow, accustomed to operating in darkness, may initially rebel against the light of consciousness, creating even more dramatic symptoms or stronger resistance. This is why the alchemists spoke of the need for patience in the great work, understanding that transformation cannot be rushed or forced. The phoenix, in its burning, does not try to preserve any part of its old form. It surrenders completely to the fire, trusting that what emerges will be more beautiful, more powerful, more authentic than what came before. So too must we learn to surrender to the fire of recognition, allowing it to burn away our false identities, our comfortable delusions, our protective but limiting strategies. In this surrender, something miraculous begins to happen. The lead of our unconscious patterns begins its slow transformation into the gold of conscious choice. We start to catch ourselves in the moment of sabotage, to feel the familiar pull of old patterns but choose differently. We begin to dialogue with our shadow rather than being possessed by it, to negotiate with our resistance rather than being overwhelmed by it. The alchemical fire of consciousness does not promise to make the work easy, but it makes the work visible. And what is visible can be worked with, can be understood, can be gradually transformed through the patient application of awareness and compassion. This is the beginning of the real work, not the work of perfecting ourselves, but the work of becoming whole. Now comes the sacred turning, the moment when the long exile draws toward its end and the soul prepares for the most tender of homecomings. You have walked through the labyrinth of your own shadows, have faced the saboteurs and deceivers that dwelt in the hidden chambers of your psyche. You have seen how the very forces that seemed to work against you were, in their twisted way, trying to protect something precious, some wounded aspect of yourself that learned long ago to hide rather than risk further harm. This is the threshold of integration, where the work of individuation transforms from analysis to alchemy, from understanding to embrace. Here, in this liminal space between knowing and becoming, you discover that healing is not about casting out the dark, but about learning to dance with it, to welcome it back into the sacred circle of your wholeness. Jung understood this as the fundamental task of the second half of life, not to perfect ourselves by eliminating our shadows, but to become whole by integrating them. Integration, This word carries within it the promise of restoration, the possibility that what has been fractured can be made whole, that what has been exiled can be welcomed home. But integration is not conquest. The ego, in its habitual way of understanding, wants to approach the shadow as an enemy to be defeated, a problem to be solved, a darkness to be illuminated until it disappears. This is the old way, the way that created the split in the first place. Integration asks for something far more vulnerable, far more revolutionary, conversation rather than domination, marriage rather than victory. Picture the ancient symbol of the Ouroboros, the serpent that devours its own tail, in an endless circle of renewal. For so long you have been running from that tail, convinced it belonged to some other creature, some foreign threat pursuing you through the corridors of your life. But now, in this moment of recognition, you see the profound truth. The tail you have been fleeing is your own. The shadow you have been trying to escape is not separate from you. It is you, the disowned part of your own nature that has been running behind you all this time, desperately trying to catch your attention. The shadow saboteur, the perfectionist who paralyzed your creativity, was not your enemy but your exiled artist, afraid that their authentic expression would be rejected. The procrastinator who delayed your dreams was not lazy but cautious, protecting your tender hopes from the harsh light of potential failure. The people-pleaser who sacrificed your truth was not weak but loving, trying to maintain connection in the only way they knew how. Each shadow you have encountered carries within it not only your rejected pain but also your unrealized gifts. The anger you pushed away holds your passion, your capacity to fight for what matters. The sadness you refuse to feel contains your depth, your ability to touch the profound beauty and tragedy of existence. The fear you tried to overcome carries your wisdom, your intuitive understanding of what truly matters enough to protect. Integration begins with a radical shift in perception, seeing the shadow not as pathology but as potential, not as defect but as gift wrapped in protective covering. It requires the courage to approach these exiled parts of yourself with the tenderness of a mother welcoming a lost child who has finally found their way home. This homecoming is not without its challenges. The shadow has learned to survive in exile, has developed ways of being that served it in the wilderness of rejection, but may no longer serve the wholeness you are becoming. The angry part of you may have learned to express itself through passive aggression or explosive outbursts. The sad part may have learned to manipulate through depression or withdraw into unreachable isolation. The fearful part may have learned to control through anxiety or freeze in the face of opportunity. Integration means teaching these exiled parts new ways of being, helping them remember their essential nature beneath the survival strategies they adopted. It means creating an inner environment so safe, so accepting, so unconditionally loving that they can finally lay down their defensive weapons and reveal the gifts they have been guarding all along. This is delicate work, requiring the patience of a skilled therapist and the compassion of an unconditionally loving parent. You cannot force integration. You can only create the conditions in which it becomes possible. You begin by listening, really listening, to what these shadow parts have been trying to tell you through their seemingly destructive behavior. The perfectionist shadow, when truly heard, might reveal, "I just wanted your work to be so beautiful that no one could reject it. I was trying to protect you from the pain I felt when they criticized your early attempts." The procrastinating shadow might whisper, "I was buying you time to become ready, to gather the strength you would need to handle success. I didn't want you to move forward before you were prepared." As you listen with this quality of compassionate attention, something miraculous begins to happen. The shadow's defensive posture starts to soften. The energy that was being used to sabotage begins to reveal its creative potential. The force that was working against you begins to turn toward service of your wholeness. This is the sacred marriage Jung spoke of, the hieros gamos between conscious and unconscious, light and dark, accepted and rejected aspects of the self. It is not a merger that eliminates difference, but a dance that honors both partners, allowing each to contribute their unique gifts to the wholeness that emerges. In this dance of integration, the shadow becomes an ally rather than an adversary. The perfectionist, transformed, becomes the part of you that maintains high standards while allowing for human imperfection. The procrastinator becomes the part that honors right timing and refuses to be rushed into premature action. The people-pleaser becomes the part that considers others' needs while maintaining clear boundaries around your own truth. The creative energy that was bound up in internal conflict becomes available for authentic expression. The passion that was twisted into self-sabotage flows freely toward what truly matters to you. The power that was turned against you becomes available for service to your highest calling. This integration happens not in one dramatic moment, but through countless small acts of recognition, acceptance, and love. Each time you notice the shadow arising and choose curiosity over judgment, you strengthen the pathway toward wholeness. Each time you honor the underlying need beneath the shadow's expression, you invite another piece of yourself back into the circle of belonging. You begin to understand that individuation is not about becoming someone new, but about becoming who you have always been beneath the layers of conditioning, protection, and adaptation. It is about retrieving the parts of yourself that you left behind in the process of learning to survive, and welcoming them back into the fullness of your authentic being. The shadow, once integrated, does not disappear but transforms from saboteur to guardian, from enemy to ally. It becomes the keeper of your depth, the guardian of your authenticity, the fierce protector of what matters most to your soul. It brings to your conscious life all the energy, creativity, and passion that was locked away in the dungeons of rejection. This is the true meaning of the Ouroboros, not endless repetition but eternal renewal, the continuous process of reclaiming lost parts of yourself and integrating them into an ever-expanding wholeness. You discover that the path forward is indeed circular, but it is a spiral rather than a closed loop, each turn bringing you home to yourself at a deeper level of understanding, acceptance, and love. Now comes the moment when understanding transforms into action, when insight becomes incarnate in the flesh and blood of daily existence. You have journeyed through the labyrinth of the shadow's deceptions, witnessed its masks and heard its many voices. You have felt the weight of its influence and tasted the bitter fruit of its false promises. But awareness alone, though precious, is not enough to free you from the ancient patterns that have governed your life. The time has come to take up the warrior's weapons and enter the practical battlefield where transformation lives or dies. This is not the battlefield of external conquest, where armies clash and kingdoms fall. This is the more intimate, more sacred warfare that takes place in the ordinary moments of an ordinary day, in the space between stimulus and response, in the pause before reaction, in the breath between impulse and choice. Here, in these seemingly mundane encounters with your own conditioning, the real revolution unfolds. The warrior's heart that beats within you now carries two weapons that the shadow cannot withstand: the sword of awareness and the shield of compassion. The sword cuts through illusion with the precision of truth, while the shield protects you from the inevitable counterattacks of an ecosystem that does not surrender its territory easily. Together, these weapons transform you from a victim of unconscious patterns into a conscious participant in your own becoming. But let us be clear about the nature of this warfare. You are not going to battle to destroy the shadow. That would be another form of the very violence you seek to transcend. Instead, you are learning the ancient alchemical art of transmutation, the sacred science of transforming lead into gold, poison into medicine, obstacle into opportunity. The shadow's energy, once harnessed and redirected, becomes the very fuel for your liberation. Consider the perfectionist within you, that relentless taskmaster who has driven you toward impossible standards and inevitable disappointment. In the old paradigm, you might have tried to silence this voice entirely, to banish perfectionism from your psyche as though it were purely destructive. But the warrior's approach is more sophisticated, more nuanced. You begin to recognize that beneath the perfectionist's harsh demands lies a craftsman's heart, a deep appreciation for excellence, a reverence for quality, a commitment to bringing forth the best possible expression of your gifts. The transmutation begins when you learn to separate the craftsman's wisdom from the perfectionist's cruelty. You keep the dedication to excellence while releasing the attachment to flawless execution. You honor the impulse toward mastery while abandoning the impossible demand for immediate perfection. The energy that once manifested as paralysis and self-criticism transforms into patience, persistence, and the kind of loving attention that allows genuine skill to develop over time. This is practical alchemy in action, not the theoretical understanding of psychological principles, but their lived application in the crucible of creative work, relationships, and daily challenges. Each time you catch the perfectionist's voice arising and consciously choose the craftsman's path instead, you are wielding the sword of awareness and demonstrating the shield of compassion in real time. The same principle applies to every shadow pattern you have identified within yourself. The procrastinator, that seemingly lazy saboteur who delays and avoids and finds endless distractions, reveals its hidden wisdom when examined through the lens of transmutation. Beneath the surface chaos of delayed action often lies a deeper intelligence, a natural rhythm that resists artificial urgency, a wisdom that knows the importance of timing, an intuitive understanding that some things must ripen before they are ready to be born. The warrior learns to distinguish between procrastination born of fear and pacing born of wisdom. The fearful delay that comes from overwhelm or perfectionism feels different in the body than the natural pause that comes from deep timing. One contracts and constricts, the other expands and breathes. One is driven by anxiety, the other by a kind of organic knowing that cannot be rushed. When you learn to feel this difference, to sense the quality of energy behind your choices, you can begin to work with your natural rhythms rather than against them. The procrastinator's energy transmutes into the wise pacer who knows when to push forward and when to wait, when to act decisively and when to allow things to unfold in their own time. This is not laziness disguised as wisdom. It is genuine attunement to the deeper currents of creative and productive energy that flow through your life. Perhaps nowhere is this transmutation more profound than in the transformation of victim consciousness into empowered creation. The victim pattern, with its deep conviction that life happens to you rather than through you, represents one of the shadow's most imprisoning deceptions. Yet even this seemingly hopeless stance contains the seeds of its own transformation. For the victim's acute sensitivity to injustice, when properly channeled, becomes the empowered creator's passionate commitment to positive change. The victim sees clearly what is wrong, what hurts, what needs attention and healing. This capacity for recognition is not weakness. It is a form of intelligence, a diagnostic ability that can serve the highest good when combined with the warrior's tools of conscious choice and compassionate action. The same sensitivity that once made you feel powerless in the face of life's challenges becomes the foundation for your power to respond creatively to those challenges. This transmutation requires a fundamental shift in identity, from one who suffers circumstances to one who shapes them, from one who reacts to life to one who responds to it, from one who is acted upon to one who acts with conscious intention. It is perhaps the most radical transformation possible because it touches the very core of how you understand your relationship to existence itself. The practical work of this transformation happens in moments so small they might seem insignificant to an outside observer. It happens when you notice the victim's story beginning to form in your mind and consciously choose to ask a different question, not, "Why is this happening to me?" but, "How can I respond to this in a way that serves my highest good?" Not, "Who is to blame for my suffering?" but, "What is mine to do in this situation?" Each time you make this shift, you are exercising the warrior's heart. You are using the monster's own strength against it, taking the very energy that the shadow would use to perpetuate victimhood and redirecting it toward empowered action. This is not denial of genuine pain or legitimate grievance. It is the transformation of pain into purpose, grievance into growth. The battlefield where this work takes place is everywhere and nowhere special. It is in the moment when your perfectionist voice begins its familiar criticism and you choose to speak to yourself with the patience of a loving teacher. It is in the instant when procrastination's sweet delay calls to you, and you pause to feel whether this is fear-based avoidance or wisdom-based timing. It is in the space when victim consciousness starts to narrate your experience and you consciously reach for your power to respond rather than merely react. These moments of choice, repeated thousands of times across the days and years of a life, constitute the real work of psychological transformation. They are the building blocks of a new way of being, the individual threads that weave together to create an entirely different tapestry of existence. The warrior's heart knows that victory is not won in a single dramatic battle, but in the accumulation of countless small acts of conscious choice, each one a declaration of your intention to be free. This is the practical magic of shadow work, not the elimination of your human patterns, but their conscious transformation into tools of awakening. The very energies that once enslaved you become the forces that liberate you. The obstacles that once blocked your path become the stepping stones to your destination. The shadows that once haunted you become the allies that guide you home to your authentic self.